Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are continuing our series on Emerson's journals. We are on journal collection number 39, dating from the year 1848, and we are up to, it says May 6th, but it also has a question mark by it, so I guess it's not quite certain that it's May 6th, but we are certainly in May. And Emerson turns 45 in this month, too. But at least by May 6th, he is not. I forgot what exactly his birth date was, but it's somewhere, I think, in early May. Anyway, with that said, I will go ahead and read the entry for that date. Also, note he is still in England at this time. I saw Tennyson first at the house of Coventry Patmore, where we dined together. His friend Brookfield was also of the party. I was contented with him at once. He is tall, scholastic-looking, no dandy, but a great deal of plain strength about him, and though cultivated, quite unaffected. Quiet, sluggish sense and strength refined, as all English are, and good-humored. The print of his head and Horn's book is too rounded and handsome. There is in him an air of general superiority that is very satisfactory. He lives very much with his college set, Spedding, Brookfield, Hallam, Rice, and the rest, and has the air of one who is accustomed to be petted and indulged by those he lives with, like George Bradford. Take away Hawthorne's bashfulness and let him talk easily and fast, and you would have a pretty good Tennyson. He has just come home from Ireland, where he had seen much vaporing of the Irish youth against England, and described a scene in some tavern, I think, where a hot young man was flourishing a drawn sword, and swearing that he would drive it to the hilt into the flesh and blood of Englishmen. Tennyson was disgusted, and going up to the young man, took out his penknife and offered it to him. "I am an Englishman," he said, "and there is my penknife, and you know you will not so much as stick that into me." The youth was disconcerted and said he knew he was not an Englishman. "Yes, I am." Hereupon the companions of the youth interfered and apologized for him. He had been in drink and was excited, etc. Tennyson talked of Carlyle and said, "If Carlyle thinks the Christian religion has lost all vitality, he is wholly mistaken." Tennyson and all Carlyle's friends feel the caprice and incongruity of his opinions. He talked of London as a place to take the nonsense out of a man. It is his brother, Tennyson Turner, who wrote the verses which Wordsworth praised. When Festus was spoken of, I said that a poem must be made up of little poems, but that in Festus were no single good lines. You could not quote one line. Tennyson quoted, quote, "There came a hand between the sun and us, and its 5 fingers made 5 nights in air." End quote. After dinner, Brookfield insisted that we should go to his house, so we stopped an omnibus, and not finding room inside for all three, Tennyson rode on the box, and B and I within. Brookfield, knowing that I was going to France, told me that if I wanted him, Tennyson would go. "That is the way we do with him," he said. "We tell him he must go, and he goes. But you will find him heavy to carry." At Brookfield's house we found young Hallam with Mrs. Brookfield, a very pleasing woman. I told Tennyson that I heard from his friends very good accounts of him, and I and they were persuaded that it was important to his health on instant visit to Paris, and that I was to go on Monday if he was ready. He was very good-humored and affected to think that I should never come back alive from France. It was death to go. But he had been looking for 2 years for somebody to go to Italy with, and was ready to set out at once if I would go there. I was tempted, of course, to pronounce for Italy, but now I had agreed to give my course in London. He gave me a cordial invitation to his lodgings in Buckingham Palace, where I promised to visit him before I went away. On the next day I found him at home in his lodgings, but with him was a church clergyman, whose name I did not know, and there was no conversation. He was sure, again, that he was taking a final farewell of me, as I was going among the French bullets, but promised to be in the same lodgings if I should escape alive after my 3 weeks in Paris. So we parted. I spent a month in Paris, and when I returned he had left London. Carlyle describes him as staying in London through a course of 8 o'clock dinners every night for months until he is thoroughly fevered. Then notice is given to one of his friends, as lately to Aubrey de Vere, who has a fine estate in Ireland, 30 miles from Limerick, to come and carry him off bodily. Tennyson had capitulated on three conditions: first, that he should not hear anything about Irish distress; second, that he should not come downstairs to breakfast; third, that he might smoke in the house. I think these were the three. So poor Tennyson, who had been in the worst way, but had not force enough to choose where to go, and so sat still, was now disposed of. Tennyson was in plain black suit and wears glasses. Carlyle thinks him the best man in England to smoke a pipe with, and used to see him much. Had a place in his little garden on the wall where Tennyson's pipe was laid up. He has other brothers, I believe, besides Tennyson Turner, the elder, and I remember Carlyle told me with glee some story of one of them who looked like Alfred, and with whom some friend coming in found lying on the sofa and addressed him. "Ah, Alfred, I am glad to see you." And he said, "I am not Alfred, I am Septimus. I am the most morbid of all the Tennysons." I suppose he is self-indulgent and a little spoiled and selfish by the warm and universal favor he has found. Lady Duff Gordon told me that the first day she saw him he lay his whole length on the carpet, and rolled himself to her feet, and said, "Will you please to put your feet on me for a stool?" Coventry Petmore described him as very capricious, and as once spending the evening with a dozen friends, not, to be sure, his equals, but as nearly his equals as any that could be collected. Yet Tennyson would not say a word, but sat with his pipe, silent, and at last said, "I am going to Cheltenham. I have had a glut of men." When he himself proposed, a day, to read Tennyson a poem which he had just finished, that Tennyson might tell him of anything which his taste would exclude, Tennyson replied, "Mr. Patmore, you have no idea how many applications of this sort are made to me." Dr. T.P. Shepherd of Providence, who traveled in the East with W. Sterling, told me that he met Tennyson at a hotel in Amsterdam, and lived there a fortnight with him, not knowing his name, but riding out with him to see the environs, and meeting at the table d'hôte. He set his servants to ascertain from Tennyson's servants his master's name, but the man was only a valet de place, and did not know. For Tennyson scrupulously concealed his name, and got into trouble with the police about his passport. Dr. Shepherd thought he must be Carlyle, from the strength and brilliancy of his conversation, until he spoke of Carlyle. One day, however, he recited the Moated Grange, and inquired of Dr. Shepherd if they liked such verses in America. Dr. Shepherd replied yes, he knew the verses, they were by Tennyson, and though he could not say they were widely known, yet they had a very cordial troop of admirers in the United States. "Well," replied the other, "I am Tennyson." And thereafter their acquaintance was intimate, and he made Dr. Shepherd promise to visit him in England. But when Dr. Shepherd was in England and inquired for him, he found, he said, that he was in a kind of retreat for the sane, which they keep there, and so saw him not. Mr. Sylvester told me that Mr. Ferry could draw a model of any loom or machine after once seeing it for Rees's Cyclopedia, and did so in the Strutt's Mills. Mr. Hallam asked me at Lord Ashburton's, "whether Swedenborg were all mad or partly knave." He knew nothing of Thomas Taylor, nor did Milman, nor any Englishman. France. Editor's note. In the first week in May, Mr. Emerson, neglecting the advice of solicitous friends, in his wish to see France, especially in days of national crisis, and incidentally to gain a better knowledge of the language, crossed the Channel. May 6th. From Boulogne to Paris, 56 leagues, 7½ mortal hours. In approaching Paris, it seemed a nation of soldiers. The climate seemed altered, and 'tis incredible that the Syrian capital, all the people poured into the street, shouldn't be so near to London. In Paris, my furnished lodgings, a very comfortable suite of rooms, 15 Rue des Petits Augustins, on the second floor, cost me 90 francs a month, or 3 francs a day. The expenses of living for a day at my rate are 6 francs 15 sous, or 7 francs. 'Tis true that a breakfast consists of a certain number of mouthfuls. Well, in France they count the number of mouthfuls, say 32 or 60, and put a price on the mouthfuls 3 cent times 5 cent times a spoonful. I looked in all the shop windows for toys this afternoon, and they are very many and gay, but the only one of all which I really wish to buy is very cheap. Yet I cannot buy it, namely their speech. I covet that which the vilest of the people possesses. French poetry is peu de chose, and in their character and performance is always prose, prose ornée, but never poesy. Madame de Tocqueville, who is English, tells me that the French is so beautiful a language, so neat, concise, and lucid, that she can never bear to speak English. 'Tis a peculiarity of the French that they assimilate all foreign words, and do not suffer them to be pronounced in the foreign manner. Every blouse in the street speaks like an academician, which is not possible in England. I do not distinguish between the language of a blouse, talking philosophy in a group, and that of a cousin. After the pair of noble fountains which play all day, the principal ornament of the Place de la Concorde is the obelisk brought from Thebes. The boulevards have lost their fine trees, which were all cut down for barricades in February. At the end of a year we shall take account, and see if the revolution was worth the trees. In Paris the number of beggars does not compare with that in London or in Manchester even. The architecture of Paris compares most favorably with that of London, is far more original, spirited, national. Here is a royal palace, they have spent a great deal of money, and they have something to show for it. This Tuileries, this Louvre, this Hotel de Ville, Palais de Justice, and old tower de la Boucherie, St. Jacques, efflorescence of France. I find the French of all soldiers all speakers. The aplomb which these need every Frenchman has. Every gamin, a certain trimness or trigness, and a certain fancy cut like a dandy boat at a regatta. A certain ingenuity and verbal clearness of statement they require, and that satisfies them that they have a new and lucid and coherent statement, though it is artificial and not an idea, verbally help and not really. Mr. Lambert is the servant of his literary theory. But where is the emancipation and joy that comes from new life of an idea? I find the French intensely masculine. I find them expressive, not reticent. Their heads are not so round as the English head, said Doherty. Saul Clow talked of the inevitable civilization and how much we owe it, as inevitable as we are the development of inevitable parts. We have got our bread and our blood out of it until this hour, and must contrive to get our friction pump or tap root still applied to it, nor must we protest in parts but in system. I suppose you could never prove to such a mind of the most ingenious mollusk that such a creature as a whale was possible. When men feel and say, those men occupy my place, the revolution is near, that I never feel that any men occupy my place. I have never met a person superior to his talent, one who had money in his pocket and did not use it. May. The most important word the age has given to the vocabulary is blouse. It has not yet got into the dictionary, and even in America for a year or two it has been of doubtful sound whether English blouse or French blouse, but at last the French Revolution has decided forever its euphony. It is not that it was new for the workman to have ideas and speak in clubs, but new in its proportions to find not 500 but 200,000 thinkers and orators in blouse. Guizot thought that they were but a handful. An orator in the French club declares that when the hour arrives for the second revolution, and it is not far off, the people, who had been too generous at the first revolution in February, will show that it can avenge as well as pardon. 'Tis certain that they are dreadfully in earnest at these clubs. And then there's an untranslated French sentence here. I'll attempt to read it. La vie à bon marché is the idea of Paris. La constance immortelle des Français, George Sand. And then there is a very long French quotation here, also untranslated. In the Spanish gallery in the Louvre, it is easy to see that Velasquez and Spagnoletto were painters who understood their business. I fancy them both strong, swarthy men who would have made good soldiers or brigands at a pinch. And in running along the numberless cartoons of old masters, the eye is satisfied that the art of expression, by drawing and color, has been perfectly attained, that on the side at least humanity has obtained a complete transference of its thought into the symbol. These Spaniards paint with a certain ferocity. Zurbaran, who paints monks, especially one monk with a skull in his hands, which seems the reflection of his own head, is a master so far. It is impossible in a French table d'hôte to guess the social rank of the employment of the various guests. The military manners universal in young Frenchmen, their stately bow and salutation through their beards are, like their beards, a screen which a foreigner cannot penetrate. At the Club des Femmes there was among the men some patronage, but no real courtesy. The lady who presided spoke and behaved with the utmost propriety, a woman with heart and sense, but the audience of men were perpetually on the lookout for some equivoco, into which of course each male speaker would be pretty sure to fall, and then the laugh was loud and general. Le Club des Clubs was one which consisted of the chiefs of all the clubs, and to which was accorded a tribune in the assembly. But they were so dictatorial and insolent that the chamber at last muttered courage enough to silence them, and I believe to turn them out. The Gallic cock. An errand boy in France is commissionnaire. A kitchen is a laboratory. Applied is consacré. A taper is not a conflagration. The negative superlative goes on increasing, and by, when all France is mad, and every man takes the other by the throat, Blanqui will hang himself for joy. An artist's ticket to society is not transferable. He has not an inch of margin to his own footing on this precipice to spare, so that, though he possessed the highest social privileges, he could not add to them, and, what is worse in his own eyes, could not impart them. Give me a rich mind which does not bring a set of stories to the new companions whom he joins, and when they are spent has no more to say but warm bounteous discourse. What trial is so severe to men as a sea voyage? A college examination is nothing to it. He who has not tired or restrained his shipmates in a month's voyage has won palms that Cambridge or the Academy or the Congress cannot give. What games sleep plays with us! We wake indignant that we have been so played upon, and should have lent ourselves to such mountains of nonsense. All night I was scarifying with my wrath some conjuring miscreant, but unhappily I had an old age in my toothless gums. I was as old as Priam, could not articulate, and the edge of all my taunts and sarcasms, it is to be feared, was quite lost. Yet, spite of my dumb palsy, I defied and roared after him, and rattled in my throat until wife waked me up. Then I bit my lips. So one day we shall wake up from this longer confusion, and be not less mortified that we had lent ourselves to such rigmarole. Torchlight processions have a seek and slay look, dripping burning oil drops, and the bearers now and then smiting the torch on the ground, and then lifting it into the air as W. described them. I find in French pictures a coloring of human flesh, analogous to dead gold in jewelry. Mr. Doherty thought this a revolution against humbugs, that the English were not so reasonable as they appear, and the French were more reasonable than they appear. All the clubs are armed, that is, have depots of arms. Paris, Rue des Petits Augustins, number 15, May 13th. The one thing odious to me now is joking. What can the brave and strong genius of C himself avail? What can his praise, what can his blame avail me, when I know that if I fall or if I rise there still awaits me the inevitable joke? The day's Englishman must have his joke, as duly as his bread. God grant me the noble companions whom I have left at home, who value merriment less, and virtues and powers more. If the English people have owed to their House of Commons this damnable derision, I think they have paid an overprice for their liberties and empire. But when I balance the attractions of good and evil, when I consider what facilities, what talents a little vice would furnish, then rise before me not these laughters, but the dear and comely forms of honor and genius and piety in my distant home, and they touch me with chaste palms moist and cold, and say to me, You are ours. Quote, Remember to be sober and to be disposed to believe, for these are the nerves of wisdom, and Mohammed's retribution of the jokers. One of the principal discoveries, or say confirmations, obtained in Europe was that bigger incomes do not help anybody. The scholar was glad to leave his manuscript and go to the window. Editor's note. The above sentence, unexplained in one of the journals of these weeks, may be well accounted for in a letter written by Mr. Emerson to his wife, May 17th, from which it seems best to introduce here the following extract. Quote, On Monday, day before yesterday, as you will read in the papers, there was a revolution defeated, which came within an ace of succeeding. We were all assured for an hour or two that the new government was proclaimed and the old routed, and Paris in terror seemed to acquiesce. But the National Guards, who are all but the entire male population of Paris, at last found somebody to rally and lead them, and they swept away the conspirators in a moment. Blanqui and Barbès, the two principal leaders, I knew well, as I had attended Blanqui's club on the evenings of Saturday and Sunday, and heard his instructions to his mounted guards, and Barbès' club I had visited last week, and I am heartily glad of the shopkeeper's victory. Quote, I saw the sudden and immense display of arms when the rappel was beaten on Monday afternoon. The streets full of bayonets, and the furious driving of the horses dragging cannon towards the National Assembly, the rapid succession of proclamations proceeding from the government and pasted on the walls at the corners of the streets eagerly read by crowds of people, and, not waiting for this, the rapid passage of messengers with proclamations in their hands, which they read to knots of people and then ran on to another knot, and so on down a street. The moon shone as the sun went down. The river rolled under the crowded bridge along the swarming quays. The tricolor waved on the great masts of the Tuileries, which seemed too noble a palace to doubt of the owner. But before night all was safe, and our new government, who had held the seats for a quarter of an hour, were safe in jail. Here follows a passage in French, which ends with some English words: drum majors, vast men with baton and huge caps of fur, sapeurs and pompiers, children on stilts, merry-go-rounds. Short editor's note: the following two sentences were evidently written 20 years later after Clow's death. End note. Citizen Blanqui, a layman with the face of an air of a conspirator, and Barbès, head of the Club de la Révolution, were the leaders of the émeute on the 15th of May, I think, which I saw. For details of May 1848 in Paris, see Remains of A. H. Clow, pages 100 to 130. The question of history is, what each generation has done with its surplus produce. One bought crusades, one churches, one villas, one horses, and one railroads. There is a long passage in French, which at the very end says Assemblée Nationale, May 23rd. Then follows this, Paris. In Paris, 117 new newspapers have been set on foot since the Revolution. This revolution distinguished from the old by the social problem agitated in every club. Arithmeticians get up and cipher very shrewdly before the masses to show them what is each man's share. The good God, they say, is full of good sense, and the extreme inequality of property had got so far as to drive to revolution, and now it will not finish until God's justice is established, nor until the laborer gets his wages, nor until there is no idler left in the land. The idler is a diseased person, and is to be treated by the state as a diseased person. And coming to the city, and seeing in it no men of information, you remain on the outside. But all this Paris seems to me a continuation of the theatre when I come out of the theatre, or of a limonade gazeuse when I come out of the restaurant. This is the famous lotus which the mariners ate and forgot their homes. I pinch myself to remember mine. I went to hear Michelet lecture on philosophy, but the sublime creed of the Indian Buddhist was not meant for a Frenchman to analyze and crack his joke and make his grimace upon. But I came out hither to see my contemporaries, and I have seen Leverrier today working out algebraic formulas on his blackboard to his class, quite heedless of politics and revolutions. I have seen Rachel in Phèdre, and heard her chant the Marseillaise. I have seen Barbès rule in his Club de la Révolution, and Blanqui in his Club des Droits de l'Homme, and today they are both in the dungeon of Vincennes. Old Revolution said, and then there are some French sentences here. The French have greatly more influence in Europe than the English. What influence the English have is by brute force of wealth, that of the French by affinity and talent. An eminent difference between Paris and London is the economy of water. In Paris, the stranger is struck with the beautiful fountains of the Place de la Concorde, and gives Paris the preference to London. But this water is not drinkable, and the houses in Paris have no wells or pumps, and buy all their water by the bucket from water carriers who bring it from certain springs. In London every house has some kind of water privilege, as that in which I have lived received its water from Hertfordshire by an aqueduct which entered at the top of the house. The new religion. You need only your own verdict. Or what if they tax you with gambling or drinking or riot, when you have all your virtue, health, and serenity safe about you unspent? Let them say it, for the good laws know whether it be so or not, and they cannot be made false witness. Much of the time every man must have himself to his friend. Nothing seems to me so excellent as a belief in the laws. It communicates dignity and an asylum in temples thenceforward to the character. The gods themselves could not help us. Ah, if a man could explain his own facts, the little systems of laws and companions and assessors or witnesses with which he walks surrounded, from which he cannot escape, the planet each of a choir of satellites. Had I not reason to say the secret of the present hour is as hard to tell as that of the future hour? Steep and craggy, said Porphyry, is the path of the gods. That unhappy man, called of genius, pays dear for his paltry distinction. His head runs up into a spire, and instead of being a healthy, merry, round, and ruddy man, he is some mad dominie. Nature is regardless of the individual. The writers are bold and democratic. The moment revolution comes, are they Chartists or Montagnards? No, but they talk and sit with the rich and sympathize with them. Should they go with the Chartist? Alas, they cannot. Mr. Doherty said the dogmas were malfeasance. It needed not to inquire whether men made them or God made them. In either case they had every right to take them away. In the natural world they had tigers, snakes, wolves, and other dogmas malfeasance, which they did not hesitate to put away and kill, and so, in the moral world, they had the like, which, like these beasts, had answered their use for a time, but were now of time unfit, noxious. It is doubtful whether London, whether Paris, can answer the questions which now rise in the minds. Life is cheap in this ant-hill of Paris. One can see that multitudes sell their future for one day. What prodigality to turn a little beautiful French Edie into the procession to be consumed in the sun and crowd. I have been exaggerating the English merits all winter and disparaging the French. Now I am correcting my judgment of both, and the French have risen very fast. But I see that both nations promise more than they perform. They do not culminate. 'Tis easy to see that France is much nearer to socialism than England. In the gay and admirable illumination of the Champs-Élysées, one could see that it was but a few steps to the phalanstery. Do not mind trifles, was the lesson so strenuously inculcated on my childhood. I did not learn it, and now I see England has not. I went to the Pantheon and learned that the tomb of Napoleon was at the Invalides. Rousseau and Voltaire sleep under the Pantheon. I have seen Rachel in Phaedra in Mithridate, and now last night in Lucretia of Ponsard, in which play she took two parts, that of Lucretia and that of Tullia. The best part of her performance is the terror and energy she can throw into passages of defiance or denunciation. Her manners and carriage are throughout pleasing by their highly intellectual cast, and her expression of the character is not lost by your losing some word or look, but is continuous and is sure to be conveyed. She is extremely youthful and innocent in her appearance, and when she appeared after the curtain fell to acknowledge the acclamations of the house and the heaps of flowers that were flung to her, her smile had a perfect good nature and a kind of universal intelligence. At the chamber of the National Assembly, by the kindness of Mr. Rush, who lent me his diplomatic ticket. Lamartine made his speech on the question of Poland. He was quite the best and indeed the only good speaker I heard in the House. He has a fine head and a free and superior style of delivery, manly and cultivated. But he was quite at his ease, no sword or pikes over his head this time, and really little energy in his discourse. He read many extracts from letters sent to him from Italy, and when he was tired, the members cried out, "Reposez-vous!" and the president gave an intermission for half an hour. The whole House of 900 members obviously listened with great respect and gladly to Lamartine, for they want information, and it has been rather parsimoniously given by any whom they could trust. His speech is reckoned wise and moderate. To me it looks as if a wise Frenchman should say to his country, "Leave Poland and China and Oregon to themselves. You have more than enough to do, at present, in constructing your own government and dealing with disorder, hunger, and faction in France." But Lamartine praised the new republic because it had not a moment of egoism, but had adopted Poland and Italy. We now dine at a table d'hôte at No. 16, Rue de Notre-Dame des Victoires, where 500 French habitués usually dine at once franc 60 centimes. Of course, it is an excellent place for French grammar. Nouns, verbs, adverbs, and interjections furnished gratuitously. I am told that there are 12,000 students connected with the university, including all the faculties. 'Tis a noble hospitality and well calculated also, as it brings so great a population of foreigners to spend their money in France. Paris has great merits as a city. Its river is made the greatest pleasure to the eye by the quays and bridges. Its fountains are noble and copious, its gardens or parks far more available to the pleasure of the people than those of London. What a convenience to the senses of men is the Palais Royal! The swarming boulevards, what an animating promenade! The furnished lodgings have a seductive independence. The living is cheap and good. Then what a luxury is it to have a cheap wine for the national beverage as uniformly supplied as beer in England. The manners of the people, and probably their inferiority as individuals, make it as easy to live with them as with so many shopkeepers whose feelings and convenience are nowise to be consulted. Meantime they are very civil and good-tempered, polite and joyous, and will talk in knots and multitudes in the streets all day for the entertainment of the passenger. Then they open their treasures of art and science so freely to the mere passport of the traveler and to all the world on Sunday. The University, the Louvre, the Hôtel de Cluny, the Institute, the Gallery of the Luxembourg, Versailles. Then the churches are always open, Notre Dame, La Sainte Chapelle, built by St. Louis, and gorgeous within, St. Sulpice, the Madeleine. Then there is the Pantheon, and there is the Jardin des Plantes, worthy of admiration. Everything odd and rare and rich can be bought in Paris, and by no means the least attractive of its shows is the immense bookstalls in the streets, maps, pictures, models, busts, sculptures, and libraries of old books spread abroad on tables or shelves at the side of the road. The manners of the people are full of entertainment, so spirited, chatty, and coquettish, as lively as monkeys. And now the whole nation is bearded and in military uniform. I have no doubt also that extremes of vice are found here, and that there is a liberty and means of animal indulgence hardly known by name or even by rumor in other towns. But any extremes are here also exceptional, and are visited here by the fatal Nemesis, who climbs all walls, dives into all cellars, but also the social decorum seems to have here the same rigors as in England, with a little variety in the application. A special advantage which Paris has is in the freedom from aristocratic pride manifest in the tone of society. It is quite easy for any young man of liberal taste to enter on a good footing the best houses. It is not easy in England. Then the customs are cheap and inexpensive, whilst it is a proverb almost that to live in England at all you must have a great fortune, which sounds to me as a certain prediction of revolution, as musket shots in the streets. So that on the whole I am thankful for Paris, as I am for the discovery of ether and chloroform. I like to know that, if I should need an amputation, there is this balm, and if hard should come to hard, and I should be driven to seek some refuge of solitude and independency, why, here is Paris. The cafes are not to be forgotten, filled with newspapers, blazing with light, sauntering places, oubliettes, or remember-nothings. One in Paris who would keep himself up with the events must read every day about 12 newspapers of the 200 that are printed there. Then in the street the affiches on every spot of the dead wall attract all eyes, make the text of all talk for the gazing group. The government reserve to their own the exclusive use of white paper, all others are in colors. After 25 days spent in Paris, I took the railroad to Boulogne, stopped at Amiens for half an hour, and saw the cathedral, which has nothing to equal to it in Paris in the elaboration of the details of its molding and sculpture on the exterior. Saw the Weeping Angel also. At Boulogne, where 6,000 English reside for cheapness, I took the night steamboat for Folkestone. The 27 miles of roughest sea between Boulogne and Folkestone made a piteous scene, of course, in the saloon of the boat, but as that wild strip of sea is from age to age the cheap standing army of England and worth 1,000,000 of troops, no Englishman should grudge his qualms. Editor's Note. After this short sojourn in France, Mr. Emerson's lecturing engagements in London called him back to England. At the Portman Square Literary and Scientific Institution, he gave, between the 5th and 17th of June, 6 lectures as follows: 1. Powers and Laws of Thought. 2. Relation of Intellect to Natural Science. 3. Tendencies and Duties of Men of Thought. These were newly written or put together from his notes, for he had found, much to his annoyance, that his lectures given in the manufacturing towns had been so fully reported in London papers that he was unwilling to read them there. 4. Politics and Socialism. 5. Poetry and Eloquence. 6. Natural Aristocracy. This also was written in England and first delivered in Edinburgh. The price that his friends had arranged for this course was high, and the audience, though including many persons of rank and of literary distinction, was not large, though it grew after the first lecture. Of it Mr. Emerson wrote, "It is truly a dignified company in which several notable men and women are patiently found." For some account of the company, see the letters of Cabot's Memoir, Volume 2, pages 546 to 549. During the delivery of this course, a letter appeared in the London Examiner urging a repetition of it at a price sufficiently low to allow of poor literary men hearing Emerson. The writer, on behalf of, quote, "poets, critics, philosophers, historians, scholars, and the other divine paupers of that class," end quote, urged this, quote, "because Emerson is a phenomenon whose like is it not in the world, and to miss him is to lose an important part out of the 19th century." End quote. Mr. Emerson could not refuse this plea of, quote, "all my public," end quote, as he called them, so postponed his departure and read in Exeter Hall 3 lectures: 1. Napoleon. 2. Shakespeare. 3. Domestic Life. End of editor's note. Long ago in Boston, Mr. George Bancroft invited me to his house and introduced me to Lord Morpeth. In England, Lord Morpeth, now changed to Lord Carlisle, invited me to dine with him, and introduced me to his sister, the Duchess of Sutherland. For a summary or verdict on the universities full of good sense, see Johnson's England as It Is, Volume 2, page 122. June 8th. I write, quote, "Mind and Manners in the 19th Century," end quote, and my read is to make the student independent of the century, to show him that his class offers one immutable front in all times and countries, cannot hear the drums of Paris, cannot read the London journals. They are the wandering Jew or the eternal angel that survives all, and stands on the same fraternal relation to all. The world is always childish, and with each gewgaw of revolution or new constitution that it finds, thinks it shall never cry any more. But it is always becoming evident that the permanent good is for the soul only, and cannot be retained in any society or system. This is like naphtha, which must be kept in a closed vessel. When I get into the 4 first-class cars on the Fitchburg Road and see sweltering men in their shirt sleeves, take their seats with some well-dressed men and women and see really the very little difference of level that is between them all, and then imagine the astonishment that would strike the polished inmates of English first-class carriages if such masters should enter and sit beside them, I see that it is not fit to tell Englishmen that America is like England. No, this is the paradise of the third class. Here everything is cheap. Here everything is for the poor. England is the paradise of the first class. It is essentially aristocratic, and the humbler classes have made up their minds to this, and do contentedly enter into the system. In England every man you meet is some man's son. In America he may be some man's father. Miss Hennell said at Edward Street to Carlyle, "Do you think if we should stand on our heads we should understand better?" It is true that there are no men in England quite ideal, living in an ideal world, and working on politics and social life only from that. Carlyle is mixed up with the politics of the day, earth, sun, Antaeus. Milton mixes with politics, but from the ideal side. Quote, "Is not this of mine a tolerable gallery?" said Philip Hone. "Yes," said Leslie, "but who would think of valuing a tolerable egg?" Works on art are like the museums themselves, each of which has a few gems and the rest is rubbish. I want a manual which has all the works of the first style engraved and described, and then of the second style. All the gems are fossil wine. When nature adds a little brain, she adds a little difficulty, or provides work for the brain to do. Were brains to be sinecures? A weevil, a mite is born in the plum or the bark on which he is to feed, but she has not thought it necessary when a man is born to insert him in a mountain of bread and cheese. June 25th. Dined at Mr. Field's at Hampstead with Rowland Hill, Mr. Sharp, and Stanfield, the painter. June 26th. Breakfasted at Mr. Stanfield's, who showed me some of Turner's pictures and his own. Each of Turner's cost 100 guineas. I went with Edwin Field and Mr. Stanfield and his son to the house of Mr. Windus, Tottenham, to see his collection of Turner's pictures and drawings, of which altogether he may have 100. This gallery was that in which Ruskin had studied. It is quite necessary to see all these pictures to appreciate the genius of Turner through his extravagances. This is the end of Part 3 of Emerson's journal collection number 39, dating from the year 1848, when the author was 45 years old. Thank you for listening.